Hi guys, here we are again talking about coaching. As always, I'm here with Yannick and Siawash, and I'm Nicki. And we've got a great question today, and I think it's also highly relevant with what we've been going through with COVID and lockdown and being isolated in our homes. And it's about coaching whilst walking and whether that's a viable approach. I've never tried it myself, but I'm very intrigued and it's something I've thought about, and I'm very curious and interested to hear your thoughts. So over to you.
Cool. Well, I might just jump in straight away because there's a couple of clients that I've done this with, and there was a powerful session that I've observed when I was teaching at the Existential Masters. There's a lot of embodied stuff going on, which I really like about coaching while walking. So initially, I've done a few bits, and the first thing that is really nice about it is you're in movement, you're in motion, and you walk next to each other. You walk side by side, and I see coaching as me and my client standing kind of shoulder to shoulder, looking ahead at their future, and often when I sit with a client, they sit in front of me and they're kind of facing me. I like to face slightly outward, so that we're both kind of facing into a direction, but we can still look at each other. But it's quite nice in coaching while walking. You just always next to each other, and so I quite like that as a metaphor in itself. But it allows the client to kind of spend some time with their own self. And what I really like as well is that you can interact with the environment, not interact necessarily, but like, if you see a tree or you see something happening, or perhaps you witness two people having a moment somewhere, whenever something is there and your client points it out, you can work with that there and then, because things are happening, which can be distracting, but you can also get a sense for your client in an environment rather than your client removed from their normal environment. So ideally somebody would come up and ask for a lighter or ask for some money or whatever, and they would interact with them, and you can use the here and now of that interaction, because chances are that tells you something about that person and you can work with it. So that's super cool. The other thing that I noticed in that session was that the client was the speed at which you're walking. I would want my client to take the lead, because that's how I coach. I want them to take the lead. But if I notice them falling back slightly and wanting you to decide where to go, all of these things, they can be very subtle, and they're very embodied. And those are all of those things we can work with, and they don't often come out when we're static, we're sitting, or we're on Zoom.
That sounds massively interesting, especially the embodied aspect, if I've understood that correctly. I can totally, it's almost like, I was going to say metaphorical, but maybe that's not the right word, but it sounds really interesting. When I think about coaching whilst walking, first of all, I'm a big walker, and it's something I do very passionately. And I noticed that I have some of my best ideas kind of being out and about in the park and surrounded by nature. So thinking about that from the perspective of being the coach in the situation, I can see it be very inspiring and freeing and kind of connecting. And I think that element of presence and outside factors, like you just described, Yannick, could be really, I can only say interesting because I haven't tried it for the session. From the perspective of the client, I'm curious to see how that plays out. Again, I haven't tried it, so I'd be curious to give it a go. My fear as a coach is, for myself, speaking personally, that it could be quite distracting. But again, all of this is speaking hypothetically. For some reason, because of my own involvement, say with the environment and things coming in from the outside, I question whether I as a coach would be able to be as present and focused and able to respond to my client, because I do find that either looking at a screen or being with someone seated in person allows me to really kind of zone in, focus, and be really present without those distractions. But, I imagine that can vary from person to person.
Yeah, and another fear that coaches bring into that, and I heard that in supervision, is that, well, first of all, you can't really take notes. So for the coaches who
Mm.
really like to take notes, that can be a real barrier to that. And also, you kind of have to look over to the side, so you only ever see half their face unless they're also facing you. So there's less kind of activity you pick up in their face,
Mhm.
but then you have the whole body that you might notice.
Mm.
So, but yeah, some of those concerns are very legitimate.
I like that. The first thing that came to my mind, I've never done it, but then actually realized when I've coached people in person, sometimes we've walked to the station or we walked to a restaurant. And in those moments, sometimes I have coached people, right? And I think it can actually be quite powerful. The only thing is I'm very much, like what Nikki said really resonated to me. And the thing that I wrote down on my iPad is squirrel. I get, so if I would see a squirrel, I'll get distracted, right? And I love nature, I love animals and stuff. And even taking the kids out to a park, it takes a lot of effort to make sure that I focus on the kids. And in the moment,
And not the squirrels.
I'm like, I've had times where I get distracted and my daughter's like running away, and I think it's just, yeah, I think it will be something probably to practice
Mhm.
and experiment with. I think the time that we live in with the pandemic, for some people that could be really great, getting them out of their environment at home where they're sitting and isolating all day long.
And people are so zoomed out, no?
Mm.
They really want to come back and have face-to-face conversations. And particularly going for a walk is also a bit of exercise. You get out to nature. It's like, especially a colleague of mine, she works predominantly with quite busy executives, and they're on Zoom meetings all day long. And she's out in Bath and then takes walks through nature. And it's such a refreshing, rejuvenating kind of activity. And during that, you have a conversation. It's very powerful. I guess depending on what environment that takes place in and how you present it, there's another concern that coaches might have, that it's unprofessional. I remember Michael Server saying that at the beginning, very beginning, he started out and he saw somebody and he met them at the tube station and then he started walking. I would never ever do that again. It's so unprofessional. And I think depending on how you present it and depending on how you offer it, and then depending on where you walk, have a little think about, well, what would be the route? Nature, I think, is really useful. If it's kind of a busy environment, it might not work at all, because then you are actually very distracted. Some people might be helpful, as we might mention, because of the interaction. But the interaction might also be distracting. So you wouldn't really want that kind of stuff in unless you actively agree that this is kind of the stuff that you would work with.
Mhm. I think what's resonated for me, or at least the idea kind of I'm taking away from it, is definitely the idea of practicing and familiarizing yourself with it. I think it's a slightly different approach, and I think being mindful of what environment you're going to attempt to do that in is helpful too. And I imagine nature, and not somewhere not too loud and distracting would be more conducive to a smoother process. But I think, becoming comfortable with it. But then I thought, actually during the lockdown, one way I have been socializing, insofar as permitted, is by going on these really long, beautiful walks with friends in the park. And actually, those conversations have been very therapeutic feeling and cathartic and coaching at times. So actually, looking at that, that has worked really well and has been really empowering, both for the people I've talked to and for how they've supported me. So I can see that working well. And the other thing I just thought as well is, nothing says that you can't just sit down after a 10-minute walk on a nice bench and, resume kind of face to face, right?
Yeah. And I had that the last time as well, that, we took breaks, we sat down for a little while and had a conversation. We're facing each other. And then we kept on walking.
I mean, I think, the aspect of walking as something really like a practice I've taken up daily. I've started doing, Tony Robbins' Hour of Power, or I'm doing the 15 minutes of whatever it's called. And, that has been so great. And he does like the breathing and the incantations and kind of the gratitude. And that's been like, I've been doing that for over a month solid, and that's been so empowering. And I think, the walking aspect of that, especially, I found has been really, really transformative. So I was just thinking, with the walking, if you brought in something like a little bit of a breath practice, because you also mentioned that, Yannick, and kind of like, walked for 10 minutes, did a bit of that breathing or something else, kind of gentle, kind of easing yourself into conversation, and then sat down on a nice park bench or somewhere in nature, and then finished off by walking them to the tube or wherever they're going. I mean, that I can see as a really great flow for a coaching session. So I'm going to try that.
Yeah, and then I've also always I thought a lot about Siawash's metaphor. We had this episode on coaching metaphors, and you talked about mountaineering. And imagine you go on a trip where you are walking and you're hiking, but there's also a coach involved. So you have all of these kind of metaphorical things playing out, but in real time. So yeah, I think there's a lot to learn, and I think, Siawash, unless you have something still burning on your mind, I think it might be a good place to bring that to a close as well. I would encourage people to just kind of try it out, get a practice client, just try it out and see what it feels like.
Yeah. No, I think maybe the last thing I think is very much connected to what you guys said is I think when we get people to shift their body and especially get them to move, their emotional state often changes, right? And in that state, often we're more open to receive coaching, more open to think differently, right? Because that changes how we are feeling. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, guys, if you out there are an avid fan of coaching while you're walking, do share if you have any additional tips for us or any resources. I'm not aware of anything written about it, of any publications or books, or, if there's a specialist out in the field somewhere. Do let us know. It's a fascinating approach, and I'm sure we can all learn more about it.
Thank you for being with us today. I appreciate your commitment to learning and growing as a coach. Just a few things before you go. First of all, we're doing this for you, so if there's anything you'd like us to talk about, do send us a question. Secondly, we're not doing this for profit, so we rely on your support to help us reach as many coaches as we can. So if you can send this episode to a friend or tell a fellow coach about what we're doing here, maybe you can subscribe or leave us a review, or even support us on Patreon. That would be amazing. And lastly, you can find us across all major platforms. So whether you like to watch or you like to listen or you like to download episodes and listen to it in your car while you're driving through somewhere with no internet, you can do so too. And that's it from us. Thank you, and I hope to see you next time.